For the first time in about 175 days, it's a post-game podcast. Pacers win their preseason opener, taking down the Charlotte Hornets in convincing fashion with some defense, with some free throws, and with some nice performances from several guys. We'll talk about the game, the rotation, the key guys, all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, holy moly, we're talking about a game. We're not talking about free agency. We're not talking about a trade rumor. We're talking about a basketball game. Pacers kick off the preseason against the Charlotte Hornets and smoke them in Charlotte, 122-97, the final score in Charlotte. Unlike last year, this is a regular season game where the Pacers went into Charlotte, took a huge halftime lead into the game, and then blew it and lost by one. They held on to this one, got it done. Defense was the story. We'll get to it all today. The story of the game being that defense, what it means from the Pacers camp, free throws, who played well. We'll talk about key performances and the rotation at the end. Not too many surprises, but still some noteworthy stuff worth talking about as the Pacers iron out who is and isn't going to play for this team going forward. Rick Carlisle going 10 deep as he said he would with guys in the rotation. Let's just start with the game. The big zoomed out. What the heck happened? We haven't seen the Pacers play in 175 days. Well, the Pacers started out much stronger than I expected, but they haven't played in a long time. They're a new group looking to play together, and yeah, they've been playing in scrimmage together, playing against a different team with different schemes, different players is very new. And yet the Pacers jumped all over the Hornets early. They got to a double-digit lead before the first quarter even ended. If it wasn't for a slightly slow start, they would have led wire to wire in this game, but they got up to an 11-point lead before the first quarter was even over. They looked very connected. Their second unit looked very good, and it was an impressive start. And they really never looked back. The lead only got under 10 once after the first quarter. It was at 9 in the middle of the third quarter, and then it immediately resurged and jumped back all the way up to 26 before the end of that third frame. So really, Pacers set the tone in the first quarter, and defense led the way early. It was so impressive to see how well the Pacers were defending early. 17 points allowed in the first quarter. After about 15 minutes, they'd only given up 19 points. After 18 minutes, they'd only given up 24 points, 43 allowed at the half. If it weren't for a 10-0 Hornets run in the third, this game could have looked even more impressive. And 97 doesn't sound like a small number, but in the context of the modern NBA, it really is, right? That number jumps off the page to me as an impressive defensive performance from the Pacers. They did a really nice job defensively in this game, and it showed up in a right. It wasn't just the raw number wasn't there. And before we talk about the defense, caveats abound. Charlotte looked awful at times this game. They looked really disconnected. Their shots were not falling themselves, and they looked a little sloppy and not totally into the game for parts of the second quarter. But some of that was that the Pacers took them out of the game. They do deserve credit for a lot of that. Big evidence there, steals, right? Pacers 7 steals, forcing 17 turnovers. They were in the passing lanes, hovering around these plays, making life hard on the Hornets to get stuff going. Buddy Hield did a good job in this area. He had 3 steals in this game. A couple guys finished with 1, and they were just being disruptive. That's something the Pacers certainly would like to do with a younger team that can move, and steals are specifically valuable for this Pacers team that says, okay, our offensive identity is going to be based a lot about transition, right? You have to get stops or get a steal to get into transition, and steals are the best way to be in transition. The Pacers getting a couple of those, being in the passing lanes, was a good start. But really, how I kind of felt the Pacers' defense shine in this game was sort of athleticism, but the way I typed it was athletic enforcement, right? The athletic players did a good job imposing their will on their matchups and using their athleticism to shrink the floor, make it hard for the Hornets to drive, and just really put a stamp on the game in a way that was really impressive from the Pacers defense. And that's why they've been emphasizing that athleticism. We've heard Rick Carlisle talk about it. We've heard Kevin Pritchard talk about it. It's something the Pacers want in guys that they want to add. And that makes guys be everywhere. And that is just harder to score on when a guy can get somewhere else quicker, or when a guy can rotate quicker, or when the floor is just shrunk because a guy can jump higher, move faster. It all just makes sense intuitively. But when you actually see it in action compared to some past Pacer teams, it was really impressive. So the first guy I'll shout out for the athletic defense, Aaron Nesmith. We'll talk a lot about Aaron Nesmith today. He was maybe the best pacer in this whole game. He was everywhere on defense. I thought he played a fantastic game chasing guards around, sliding around on the defensive end of the floor. I learned that in Boston they sometimes called him Crash because he would, be reckless like that in a way that sometimes would cause him to crash. But in this game, he did a great job keeping that athleticism contained, playing well within himself, and he really stood out to me on that end of the floor. And look, it's a preseason game. We'll talk about him in a second. But hey, if you can have a wing who can play defense, Pacers will certainly take that. Obviously, when you talk about athleticism and defense, you talk about Isaiah Jackson, who was just everywhere in this game, 5 for 8 from the field, but the defensive stats, 4 blocks, just absolutely leaping everywhere, 2 of them on back-to-back possessions to keep the Hornets out of the paint. He was moving around really well on the defensive end. 4 fouls, of course, something he'll have to clean up. He knows it. It changed the Pacers' rotation a little bit in this game, but did a great job with the blocks, great job imposing himself with that athleticism. Miles Turner, not quite as athletic as Isaiah Jackson, but a much better overall defender. He himself had 2 blocks, did a nice job. He only played in the first half, but he himself also was imposing and quick and showed why, oh yeah, he is a really good defender. And like I said earlier with the Steelers, Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield actually played some solid defense in this game. I say actually because I'm typically not very high on Buddy Hield's defense, but he did a good job in this game, moving on a string with the rest of the guards on the perimeter, staying with his matchup, and being disruptive with his speed. So a lot of good defense in this game from the Pacers. And that matters significantly because, one, if you'll recall, last year, trade deadline to the end of the season, dead last, worst defense in the NBA. That's so un-Pacers from an ethos perspective. And yes, this is a new Pacers, a new era, a new head coach, a bunch of young players. I don't expect them to mirror the old Pacers and that old ethos. But given what this franchise has been forever, I think there is an expectation for the defense to be better than the worst. And they were much better in this case. They've been working in practice on defense with, I think Rick Carlisle described as a 2-to-1 ratio of time. So 66% of their time they're working on defense in camp, and that's communication, rotating, being together as a unit. So there are less lapses than last year. That was on display in this game. And even if the Pacers can't get outside of maybe the bottom 10 in defense, but the group they had from the trade deadline onward last season is closer to the team they have this season. If they can go from last to even 22nd, that would be a noticeable sign of improvement for this team that really needs it. It's, of course, one preseason game against a team that was clunking every three and didn't look like their hearts were in the game. It's not smart to have takeaways from such a game, but if you are looking for signs of encouragement, the Pacers, who've been practicing something, were able to execute it very well in the first game. The lead started to kind of dip, ironically, when the Pacers changed the rotation in the second half, but this second unit was another story of this game to me. And really, 3 guys were a part of it in both halves. 4 guys, technically, but 3 guys were solely a part of it. And that's Aaron Nesmith, TJ McConnell, and Terry Taylor. All of their plus minuses in this game, plus 30 or higher. Terry Taylor leading the way at plus 33. Those 3 were always in the second unit. Mathurin was typically there, although his plus minus got smoked playing very late in the game with a really rockety group that featured the other rookies. And then the center sort of flip-flopped, right? Miles Turner was with that group for a little bit. That went really well. Isaiah Jackson spent a lot of time with that group, and it went well. And James Johnson, even for a few minutes, was the center for that group. But in general, those 3 guys, McConnell, Nesmith, and Taylor, did great together. And then Mathurin, he was in there as well, did a great job. We'll talk about Ben Mathurin and his debut coming up in the second segment. So that second unit was a big part of success for the Pacers. If you'll recall, after their first practice, that group was gassing themselves up about how many stops they got on the defensive end. It was clear in this game why that group fits so well together. They did a better job on offense than I expected. In general, the whole Pacers team did a better job on offense, not being so heliocentric. And maybe this is on me for thinking just about this team being a guard team and who's going to shoot and how they're going to get their shots. But they were moving it around and pitching it around and very well. They had a lot of ball movement in this game that made it not feel like anyone was above anyone else in the pecking order. And that led to a lot of good rim attacks and great free throws. The final story of the game, free throws. Pacers get to the line 27 times. 27 times. Charlotte gets there 36 times. A lot of foul calls in this game, but Charlotte shot 9 more free throws than the Pacers. The Pacers still made more. They were 26 for 27 from the line. Isaiah Jackson, the lone misser from the free throw line. That will always work. If you shoot that well from the free throw line, you will win very well. So impressive movement on offense from the Pacers, who were able to kind of get into the paint, get some free throws up, and be effective. And hey, a complete performance. Both ends of the floor, 122-97. Looks good, feels good. And for a team that's been working on defense, to have the defense show up on night one was great. For a team that's stressed, hey, we want to hustle every second we're out there, to have no lapses of judgment, to have no one taking off a possession was great. All the stuff they talked, they did. And that was something the Pacers had trouble with last year. They said a lot of stuff, they didn't follow through on. Even if the Pacers don't end up being good this year, if they follow through on the things they say, I think that will mean a lot to the fan base and to the team themselves. So to see it in game one was, of course, encouraging. And, of course, to win is, of course, encouraging for a young team, especially in a preseason game where they can get some momentum going ahead of the regular season. So who shined? What stood out to me? What kind of stuff will be important throughout the rest of the regular season? Lots to talk about. It's only one game, but it's the only game the Pacers have played in, again, 175-ish days. Lots to digest and marinate on as time goes forward. So let's keep talking about this game. But before we do that, guys, I want to talk to you about BetOnline.net, your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find all over at betonline.net. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They've got lines up for this week of football. Colts play tonight in Denver, Thursday Night Football. No Jonathan Taylor for the Colts. Line Broncos -3 over at BetOnline. Ooh, that seems close. Given how the Colts have been playing, that is surprising to me. All those lines and more over at betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, NBA, boxing, and golf. Head to that website, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview starting next Monday. 6-episode extravaganza from the Locked On Podcast Network, getting you ready for the NBA season. I'll be on there combining the whole league into one Ultimate NBA Preview starting again October 10th. Search for the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Let's keep talking about Pacers Hornets. Pacers again, winners by 25 to open the preseason over the Charlotte Hornets in Charlotte. Just impressive stuff from a team with a lot of new players. Speaking of those guys, a lot of stuff I want to talk about, some performances, some just general stuff that I thought were either important, noteworthy, or totally worth discussing in the context of this basketball game. I don't know if I'm going to do this for every game this season. I've never done it in the past, but it feels fitting today. Player of the game, Aaron Nesmith. Aaron Nesmith standing out. This is a fascinating discussion of context, success, and consistency. Context. Aaron Nesmith was not good in Summer League. Quite frankly, he kind of stunk. And part of that, to me, and as some have discussed, was he came in such a weird situation. He couldn't play at first till the trade was finalized, so he wasn't really practicing and was kind of thrown in the fire. Totally different team, different sets, new players. Didn't look very good. In this game, clearly has been practicing with the team, has an obvious role, is asked to do X, Y, Z things, and he did a fantastic job with them. Like I said in the first segment, his defense really stood out. The athleticism, the mobility, and the Hornets in this game, look, they didn't have Miles Bridges. They didn't have Gordon Hayward, guys who normally give the Pacers fits because they're those bigger, stronger wings. That's where the Pacers have struggled for years and years and years. I would love to see Nesmith on those guys, but what we did see is on kind of these wing guard hybrids where Nesmith can, use his speed to stay in front of them and they can't overpower him. He can really hold his own and do a good job on the defensive end of the floor. And even if he's not awesome against the bigger wings, having another option to throw at some sort of forward types is something the Pacers really need on the defensive end of the floor, because look, even if you can be just one of 3-and-D on the wing, if you can just shoot like Doug McDermott, or you can just defend like a bunch of guys, you'll find a spot on a team somewhere in some way. You'll find a role even a lot of times if you can just do one or the other. So if Nesmith can just be this defender, there you go. I mean, that's a guy who can play for them. And the thing that extended Aaron Nesmith beyond just being a defender in this game, put the ball on the floor. He was dribbling it around. He didn't end up with any assists, but made some nice passes. He would have had one, but a foul was called before Bennedict Mathurin 3 went in. His handles were impressive. He got to the rim for a few buckets, 6 free throw attempts. That's not something I expected to see from him. So that would be an interesting wrinkle in addition to his game, is if he became more of an off the dribble threat than I predicted. And oh, by the way, this guy who was lauded as a 3-and-D prospect, 2 for 5 from deep. I mean, if he is a 3-and-D player, the Pacers did much better in the Brogdon trade than many thought at the time it was made. If he's just a defensive player, that's still good. If he can put the ball on the floor, that's also an added thing for him. Just, it's one game. You got to see more from all these guys, especially when he's going against real wings or more wing-sized, traditionally wing-sized players in the current NBA ecosystem. But in this Hornets matchup, he did very well. He showed what his strengths can be, and I thought he was the best Pacer, right? Just given his role and importance. And that's why he was a plus 30, right? He did a great job plugging holes on defense, finding ways to make the offense keep humming. And if you're going to hit 2 threes, that's even better. So the Pacers, interesting potential here for a guy who could be 3-and-D. Isaiah Jackson, second guy I want to talk about here in segment two. What a special talent. Just there were a couple possessions, especially when he was in with TJ McConnell, where he would set a screen, and this was something he talked about practicing, waiting until the ball handler gets around him and then just runs to the basket, jumps as high as he can, and dunks. I think he did that twice in this game. Uh, there's just no way he's not the backup center this year. That was sort of already known. But 5 for 8 from the field in this game. Attempted a three. It looked smooth, even though it was completely way off. The form was better than last year, though. 6 boards, 2 of them were offensive, 4 blocks. I mean, he just is such a unique player with his mobility and athleticism. And just the vertical spacing is sort of an element the Pacers have never had. And the way it changes the game makes him look so special. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he can continue to fit in for this team. Miles Turner was good. That's really noteworthy because he hasn't played since January. 12 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. For all you detractors who go, 12 and 3, yuck. He only played the first half. He only played 18 minutes in this game, had an ice on his knees in the second half. Again, hasn't played since January. I assume that is the core reason why he did not play. There are no more Zooms this year, so I cannot ask for road games, so I cannot ask questions when the Pacers are on the road. But 3 for 8 from the field, 6 for 6 from the line, did a good job drawing those fouls to get that 12 points and 3 boards. And 3 assists was impressive. A lot of nice internal passes from Miles Turner. I think that's a new element to his game and something that playing alongside Jalen Smith will force him to do. Of course, 2 blocks is something Miles Turner will love to have at any chance. He looked good in his first action in a while, and there was no reason for him to play in the second half. Isaiah Jackson started at the 5 spot, and Turner did a good job fitting in with the second unit as well, which I thought was noteworthy. Something I didn't think would be something they needed to do with him, given just the role he has, the role of other bigs on this team. But, given some Isaiah Jackson foul trouble, Jackson was also the first sub who came in for Miles. That was something I think they did on purpose. TJ McConnell was good in this game as well. Another guy I want to shout out. I had a couple people on Twitter noting that they thought he played better from a passing perspective than Halburn. I don't think that's crazy to say. Both had 6 assists, but McConnell was a good engine for the second unit, does a really good job tying together that group that did so well in this game. 3 for 5 from the field. He had that classic TJ McConnell sequence where he hit a fadeaway in the lane and then immediately forced a turnover on the inbounds pass. He looked as good as new, a little bit better than the guy who finished the season at the end of last year. And if he can take a step forward from last year, that would go a long way in helping this Pacers team. Let's talk about the second unit, because this isn't the second unit I necessarily expected. I thought maybe O'Shea Brissett would be in there, and I thought either Duarte or Hield would be there instead of Mathurin. But it was a great group, and I think that putting Mathurin in there does add a little bit more of a ball handling element. Mathurin, who we'll talk about in a moment, did do a good job getting into the lane, looking slithery, getting to the rim, getting some shots up from floater range, right? Missed all his threes, but did a good job inside the arc. Having that balance of McConnell and Mathurin makes that unit a little bit more dangerous in a way that makes a lot of sense when you combine it with a bunch of non-creators in Nesmith, Taylor, and Jackson. But back up, Nesmith is creating. He's dribbling in this game. So that group had more ball handling than I expected, given the context of how guys played in the specific game. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Rick Carlisle continue to turn to that lineup until it stops working, because they got more ball handling in it than I thought they could, and that's something I thought would be an issue for this team on the second unit. Jalen Smith, rebounder. Another key thing, Pacers need this rebounding from someone. He had 10 in this game, only guy in double figures on the glass. Let's talk about Ben Mathurin, his debut. I can't believe I made it. 19 minutes, haven't even talked about the 6th overall pick, and he should be the story of the game, but a lot of other stuff stood out to me in a way that he didn't, which isn't a knock on him. It's just how the game went. Inside the arc, brilliant game from Ben Mathurin, right? Take away his 0 for 4 from deep, and he was 5 for 6 on 2-pointers, 5 for 5 from the free throw line, 1 assist, and 15 points, right? He was really, the word I used, I think I already said it on the show. I DM'd it to someone as well, but he was really slithery, right? He was getting around the screens or getting around his matchup, getting into the paint and being a little snake, hard to contain. So he had the floater or a shot at the rim or something when he would get into the lane, which was really impressive. His defense was just fine, not good, not bad, I would say, for his debut. But I thought his offensive game was solid. And if he can be that kind of guy in his career, early in his career, where he's already got a good combo of moves and a good enough handle, right? Only 2 turnovers. That when he gets into the lane, only 1 turnover, 2 fouls. That when he gets into the lane, he can already be a threat to launch a floater or get all the way to the rim and score at any time. That's really helpful for both a second unit that needs ball handling and a team that is looking to develop him into a talented player in the future. He had a really nice game and a really nice offensive package. I might have underrated his defense a little bit. I think he did fine on that end. But I thought his offense was more impressive. The fact that he was able to kind of create his own shots in general, not need a pass, not need a set to get set up and get going. Last guy I want to shout out, I just got to plaster this on my forehead. I am an Andrew Nembhard fan numero uno. I need a big foam finger. Not necessarily that I'm a fan or not a fan of any player, but the way he plays is just so exactly what I think makes sense for a point guard. Like, if you're going to be a tall point guard, being a guy who can make passes other guys can't because you're 6'5" and pulls up from the elbow because your matchup can't get in your face, and you can make a lot of tight passes because you read the game really well. Like, I just am such a fan of that play style. And he really showed it in this game in a way that was impressive, right? He ends up playing the whole final frame, 4 for 8 from the field, 3 assists. I really enjoyed watching him play to end this game. Not a ton of bearing on the final results or anything, but as he grows as a pro, I'll be fascinated to see what he can be. Seems like he's a guy who would fit into the way Rick Carlisle wants to play, and had a nice debut in preseason for the Pacers. One more segment here talking about the rotation. Any surprises? What happened? I tracked all the subs until it clearly became not the real rotation. We'll talk about what it was, what it wasn't, what it could mean for the Pacers this coming season. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Warriors, Cyrus Ataz. Break it down. Draymond Green, Jordan Poole beef in practice. Yikes. Cyrus will have all that over at Locked On Warriors. Pacers' first game means the first glimpse of what Rick Carlisle's rotation might be. Always an interesting topic. I made my own guess at the beginning of the season, and by that I mean really it was like late July, early August, and I got 9 out of 10 players right. Um, as expected from camp, the starters were the guys that were starters in camp, right? That was Tyrese Haliburton, Buddy Hield, Chris Duarte, Jalen Smith, Miles Turner. I'm not going to dive into the minutes specifically yet because it wasn't a real rotation. Miles only played the first half. Nobody played more than 22 minutes, which was Haliburton and Smith. But I will talk about who did play in what group. That was the starting five. Between Hield, Duarte, and Mathurin, it was up to the team who would and wouldn't start. Obviously, to me, it's all about maximizing the time of Haliburton, Mathurin, and Duarte this season. I understand Hield playing both as a threat and things like that. But that starting lineup is fine, and especially if Mathurin is creating the way he was with the second unit today, that might make the most sense from a lineup perspective. Although I understand Mathurin starting at some point this season having a lot of value, getting him with Haliburton as much as possible having a lot of value. The second unit's where my miss was. My guess for the second unit was McConnell, Nesmith, whichever one of the 3 guards didn't start, Brissett and Jackson. The difference being Terry Taylor was in the second unit instead of O'Shea Brissett. So my first miss of prediction. So, wow, bench mostly what most expected with Terry Taylor in for O'Shea Brissett. So let's pause there. I get it. I get it. Terry Taylor had a really nice end to the last season, a really unique skill set with the offensive rebounds and his ability to finish around the rim and his mobility for a center/forward, whatever you want to call him. In this game, he did Terry Taylor stuff, right? Got the offensive rebound put back, finished with 4 points, 2 boards, and again, plus 33. The mobility helps him on defense. And another part of this that I haven't gotten as much of a chance to talk about because there hasn't been as much time for practice notes. Basically every day in practice, someone has given Terry Taylor praise. Rick Carlisle, a couple players, like a lot of people, including myself, in practice like to ask players, who's standing out to you, either more than your expectation or as a guy who grew from last year, someone who's stepping up in your runs, in your practices, who just looks better. A lot of Terry Taylor answers. Tyrese Haliburton gave the Terry Taylor answer. I think James Johnson noted something about Terry Taylor playing well. And there was a third one, I can't remember. But a lot of Terry Taylor praise coming out of practice, which to me, between the lineup we heard on the first couple of days of camp for the second unit, the jerseys that we could see players wearing in practice, which is usually an indicator of who's on what unit, as well as the gobs of praise for Terry Taylor. Not that it wasn't, it totally deserved praise, but there was a lot of it. Either way, that made me think, okay, maybe he will be in the second unit. And he was in this game. So that was the first kind of throw off from what some considered the expected rotation to be. But I think that's his spot to lose at this point. I mean, if he's going to have that good of a plus minus, fit that well into the lineup and have that kind of game, yeah, he's going to keep playing for the Pacers. as their backup four. So impressive performance from him, and that was the rotation snafu from the expectation numero uno. But he's been getting high praise, and I think he'll continue to play. And I don't think anything about what the starting rotation was for this game could change, except for which of Duarte, Heald, and Mathurin starts and comes off the bench as time goes forward. Now, after the second unit, and the sub pattern, by the way, for those, I tracked this because I'm weird, but Isaiah Jackson was the first sub by a lot. He came in for Miles Turner. He was also the first sub out because of two fouls for Terry Taylor. And then the third sub was Mather and McConnell, both coming in for Heald and Halburn. And then Turner came in for Jalen Smith. I'm guessing that would normally be the Terry Taylor in for Isaiah Jackson sub instead, but or excuse me, Terry Taylor in for Jalen Smith sub, but they'd already made one because. And then the last sub was Nesmith in for Duarte. So Duarte, Mathurin were together for a tiny bit before the full second unit was in there. Starters came back in the second quarter. Miles in for Jackson a little later. So because Miles was playing with the second unit earlier. And then the second half, like I said, Miles Turner did not start. He had ice packs on his knees. So Isaiah Jackson started. Mathurin was the first sub in that case. And then Kendall Brown came in. And I said, okay, I'm going to stop taking notes about the rotation now. Kendall Brown is not one of the 10 guys who's going to be in the regular season rotation. Let's just talk about the hierarchy that came in there. So Kendall Brown came in the third quarter of this game. He ends up playing almost 14 minutes. Nothing too noteworthy to talk about. Not that he was bad. He just didn't do anything worth a ton of discussion. But he came in and played, and that's fine. Kendall Brown should play in the preseason. That's the time to do it. Once the G League season starts, the clock starts on his days counting towards his maximum number of days he can play with the Pacers this season. Okay, let him play now, get evaluation now, and it doesn't count against the clock. But O'Shea Brissett had not played yet. So I was pretty surprised to see Kendall Brown before him. It is what it is. Again, you would like to evaluate who you want to evaluate. But then the next sub was James Johnson. James Johnson played center. James Johnson was playing the 5 before O'Shea Brissett was in. So I kept being surprised at the subs ahead of O'Shea Brissett. He did not play until the fourth quarter. Those were the things. That's when I got really thrown off by the rotation. I don't know that order is what Carlisle views. And the other factor here is James Johnson was playing the 5. I don't think O'Shea Brissett would play the 5. I think James Johnson would be a more natural fit at the 5, given his enforcer capabilities, than O'Shea Brissett would be. But, Kendall Brown playing before him was certainly interesting. Brissett did play the entire fourth quarter. It went fine. He finished with 6 points and 3 rebounds. Again, like Kendall Brown, nothing noteworthy worth talking about there. But he didn't play until after those other forwards, which was pretty interesting. So differing from the norm, O'Shea Brissett not in the rotation and not playing much at all, not till the fourth quarter, which really threw me off compared to what I expected. But what I expect does not mean anything. What the Pacers expect is what matters. Other noteworthy stuff. Everybody played except for Daniel Tice, who we were told would not play because he's ramping up his conditioning from Eurobasket, and Goga Batadze. Goga Batadze did not play. We were not told he would not play. However, he did also play in Eurobasket. So part of me wants to say, yeah, they're ramping him up from the competition as well, but that was not noted to us at practice. His team was out of the competition much earlier than Tice's. So not sure if there's a reason he didn't play, but Goga, the only player who I thought would play that didn't play in this game, which was something, I guess. Davidas Servidas and Langston Galloway, I think. The only two names I haven't said yet in this entire podcast. Did both play for the final 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Langston Galloway hit a shot. Servitas was out there for 3 minutes and 15 seconds. If you are interested in roster battles, quick notes. If you're thinking that the last roster spot between James Johnson and Langston Galloway, if they're competing for it, James Johnson played almost 13 minutes. Langston Galloway played 3 minutes of garbage time. James Johnson played in the third quarter and was plus 11 in sort of competitive portions of the game. It seems like James Johnson is winning that roster battle. Makes sense given his experience, his position, and things like that. But again, Langston Galloway deserves the first shot at this. David Servitas is the only guy who's eligible for a two-way that's currently signed. So it seems like him getting minutes is a general positive note towards that if they want to have him go that way. But it is one preseason game, so noteworthy for cuts. Either way, everybody played except for Goga and Tice, and O'Shea Brissett was the only guy that deferred from my rotation projections. But a fun game, fun debut from the Pacers, flying around the court, scoring well without hitting many threes. They actually shot pretty poorly from the outside, but the athleticism allowed them to get into the paint, get the free throws up enough. Despite finishing 6 for 30 from deep, the Pacers walked all over the Hornets in a fun victory. We'll continue to talk about Pacers basketball, of course, here on the Locked On Pacers podcast tomorrow, Friday. We'll be talking a little bit of Knicks, who the Pacers play for the next 2 preseason games. We'll also be talking about the NBA GM survey. Ooh, interesting stuff. Always fun to hear what NBA GM's thoughts are on the Pacers. And got to talk about Victor Wembanyama versus Scoot Henderson. Of course, it's a huge storyline for the Pacers. And honestly, I have a lot of takes. David Locke nailed it on Locked On Jazz if you want to hear it, but it's a pretty big moment in NBA history, those games between Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson. You got to check them out if you can. So, yeah, lots coming here on Locked On Pacers. Hope you enjoyed the Pacers' first basketball performance in months. We'll, of course, continue to cover it all here on Locked On Pacers. Hope you all had a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.